It's time allocated. So if you're going, okay, well, this is my weakness, I think of it as like a mixer deck. So if you've got your mixer deck and you've got your 5 dials, obviously we're trying to get all the dials to average as high as we can, but we will have biases. So everyone has them, whether it's a conditioning bias. My conditioning dial is just up more. I just don't need to touch on that as much. My gymnastics is down relative to my other movements. For her, you just said, okay, the weightlifting is down. So she probably needs to be touching on the snatching, if it's snatching as an example, twice a week. But if she's good at butterfly pull-ups or chest to bar, she has high capacity, good positions, once a week's probably enough.
Welcome to the Unbound podcast. In today's video, we answer a listener question about how to best balance Olympic lifting and gymnastics progression. And is it really possible to do both? Listener question from Layda.
Come on, you got it.
Layda, Layda. Layda Louise asks, how does one get stronger at Olympic lifts while also getting good at gymnastic skills? How should one balance the two out to see results? So first question, I guess, in there is how does one get stronger at Olympic lifts while also getting good at gymnastics?
The easiest way to think about it is she spoke about gymnastic skills specifically, not strength elements of the gymnastics. So something like better positions would be a skill or better timing would be a skill, rather than I need to develop more strict pull-ups, so a strength limiter. Those things can be added into your warm-up. So if you break down a session and you go, okay, well, I've got my warm-up, I've got my strength piece or my main piece, and then I might have my cool-down. Your warm-up and your cool-down can be used to address that. You just need to make sure that the skill stuff doesn't take away from the strength stuff. So the time that you do those sets for, so you're not going to go for an hour and then go into your strength stuff. And the intensity is just going to have to be varied. And depending on the demand of the strength cycle, so if you have a really heavy day, then you're probably not going to go really high intensity skill work. The strategy I would use is maybe just doing something like 2 sets. So you might work through 2 sets of some hollow rocks, moving into some kip and re-grip stuff, and you use them as primers. So you're still getting that kind of 8 to 10 minutes of constant practice, dialing in your positions, while still warming up and increasing blood flow, and then moving into your strength stuff.
Which of those movements is a priority to you? So if you're really weak, or you're really bad at your gymnastics movements, but your Olympic weightlifting is excelling, like which one takes precedence? Which one do you need to prioritize first? If you can barely kick up to the wall, but you can snatch 100 kilos as a male, then there's probably something that you should be focusing on more, specifically the gymnastic skills, because it will have carryover into your weightlifting and vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. Thoracic extension for something like the snatch is a common one that you'll see, and they lack it in their handstand position as well. So things like better positions for strict handstand push-ups or handstand walks, it's a common fault across both movements. So you're kind of going to hit 2 birds with 1 stone there.
Yeah, and let's say that you're good at both. So you're like, okay, so I've got a decent level of ability in my Olympic weightlifting, but I've also got a decent level in my skills, and I'm just looking at improving both of them at the same time. My strategy for that would generally be looking at doing the skills, like you said, is either a warm-up or a primer, or do it as at the end of the session. So you've done your Olympic weightlifting session, even if it's heavy, then you can kind of gauge of how much energy you have remaining, and then you can put some of those extra skills into that. But alternatively, if you are doing it as a warm-up, or it's like a warm-up movement, then it will have inherent carryover to opening up your shoulders, getting you in better positions, and then maybe even your Olympic weightlifting becomes better.
Yeah, exactly. And something to consider, one of the benefits of doing CrossFit or mixed modality training is your recovery just gets better. So if you have a look at CrossFitters that go and do bodybuilding, they're probably not sticking to the 2-minute prescribed rest periods. There's a lot more supersetting going on. They're able to tolerate that. And if you look at, okay, we're desaturating a muscle, we're trying to create as much stress as possible, they just recover way faster. So they can recover in 60 seconds rather than the 2 minutes that's prescribed. That's an advantage. So what happens is you can probably superset some things. So you go, okay, well, I'm going to be back squatting, and I'm supersetting my back squatting with some skill work on my handstands. That's not necessarily going to take away from that main movement, but it's also going to allow you to condense the session or get a little bit more into your session without having to allocate more time.
Which is a benefit in itself, because no one wants to be here more than an hour in most cases. Like some people do, but for the majority of us, like you have an hour allotted out for your day, or maybe you have some extra training, you're coming back after work. You don't want to spend more time than you have to diddling around or just absolutely fatiguing yourself to the point where you're not getting anything out of your skills and you're frustrating yourself. You're also not getting anything out of your lifts because you're missing them all because you're too fatigued.
Yeah, exactly.
So it has a good carryover of both. I guess another like counterpoint to that, like let's look at this from another perspective, because I don't know if Leda actually has like any issues with her gymnastics or her strength. She's obviously looking at some clarification of which ones, how to prefer it, how to choose which one you want to do, or like what way you'd want to do.
It sounds like she wants both to progress equally.
Of course. So she likes them. She wants them to progress, which, funnily enough, like I've never heard anyone be like, oh, I want to progress my cardio more. Like it's always like gymnastics, strength, because they're usually the lackers and they're usually the harder things to work on.
Yeah.
But let's look at this from another perspective. Let's say that her gymnastics is really good, like really good, and she lacks in weightlifting. What would you recommend for someone like that?
It's time allocated. So if you're going, okay, well, this is my weakness, I think of it as like a mixer deck. So if you've got your mixer deck and you've got your 5 dials, obviously we're trying to get all the dials to average as high as we can, but we will have biases. So everyone has them, whether it's a conditioning bias. My conditioning dial is just up more. I just don't need to touch on that as much. My gymnastics is down relative to my other movements. For her, you just said, okay, the weightlifting is down. So she probably needs to be touching on the snatching, if it's snatching as an example, twice a week. But if she's good at butterfly pull-ups or chest to bar, she has high capacity, good positions, once a week's probably enough.
Yeah. So there's no need to go like out the gate and be like, I'm going to do 30 minutes of gymnastics and an hour of weightlifting and also do a CrossFit class. And inherently, you'll probably get some touches on all three in those domains.
Your dose just changes.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're going to expose yourself to a little bit more of that stimulus, a little bit more consistently, and you'll progress.
Cool. Well, let's look at the second part to her question, which was how should one balance the two to see results? So even though we've talked about how to schedule it, so looking at either using a warm-up or a cool-down for your gymnastics as part of like adding that in as a skill component, and then prioritizing obviously whatever's weaker, which dial is not as high. She's looking at progressing both and how to balance them to see results. So I guess to flip the script a little bit, is where would you see someone not balancing those two? So inherently one of those dials are just progressing way more.
An example of that would be, we spoke a little bit about training age. So if I've had a lot of exposure to weightlifting or just general slow strength movements, all right? But I haven't really had much exposure to the gymnastics.
Yeah.
Even though I might put a little bit more time into my weightlifting, my gymnastics is most likely going to progress faster. It's just relative to your start point. So we all know as we train and we've been training for longer, the progress slows down. So we'll work all year for a couple of kilos and we don't get those beginner gains. So it's really dependent on where she is and how long she's kind of been doing these things for. The other thing to consider when you're trying to push both dials or you're trying to push multiple dials at once is your progress is always going to be slower. But that's fine because you're progressing. Overall, your progress is still kind of similar, but they're just all progressing 1% rather than one going 3%. So you're just sharing the progress across the disciplines.
Yeah, and I guess for many people, it might not be exactly how quick they want it to get done. They want everything to be done as soon as possible. They want to be able to hit that new PR on the snatch. They want to be able to get that new gymnastic skill or that longer handstand hold. But if you are looking at working a lot of things at the same time, the biggest issue will be the fact that it won't be as quick as you want it to be.
And there's heaps of strategies. Like, it really just depends on her as a person and what her personality is like. If she's someone who needs training variance or she needs things to kind of pivot, having specific micro phases in the program is probably a good thing. So for 4 weeks, you bias your weightlifting. Then for 4 weeks, you bias your gymnastics. So it's giving her that variance and that deload to allow her to kind of recover but stay engaged with the program. Other people like it to just be almost linear progression, repeat each week, where it's like, oh, well, I did 5 reps. Now this week I'm doing 6 reps. It really just depends on her as a person.
First time, yeah. Awesome. That covers off her question. If you have any of your own listener questions, don't hesitate to comment on any of the videos, whether it's a podcast or a reel. We'll answer them as soon as possible in the next podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have a listener question to ask us, please don't hesitate to message us on Instagram at Unbound Athletic. Thanks for listening to the podcast.